Ghost towns in the US are plentiful, and when you've got Alabama ghosts, Florida creatures, and more haunting you, they may be worth learning about. Kahaba was actually Alabama's first state capital, but it was abandoned after just 46 years. Since it's located on the confluence of the Kahaba and Alabama rivers, flooding regularly overtook the town, destroying buildings and slowly turning it back into wilderness. Economic trouble also took its toll, first as the state legislature was moved to Selma, and later from the Civil War. One famous event during Kahaba's Civil War era was the arrival of the town's first apparition, the will-o-wisp known as the Peg's Ghost. In 1862, on a moonlit night, a young couple was walking behind Colonel C.C. Peg's home, ambling about the thick stand of cedars, when a glowing ball of white light suddenly appeared before them. Flashing from side to side a few feet above the path, the apparition moved so close that they could almost touch it. Then it quickly disappeared in the undergrowth, only to reappear beside them moments later. When the gentleman tried once again to touch the object, it disappeared, much like the town itself was soon fated to vanish. One cannot help but wonder about the historical circumstances and coincidences that surround the ghost story. The home of the colonel, the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment, was the social center of the town during this time. The large grounds with their forests of cedars, magnolia trees, pines, scented flowers, and fountains describe the ideal retreat for lovers, desperate to escape the harsh realities of the time. The home was a place to court and to forget, but significantly it was the colonel that would return home to recruit more men for his, company. So was the young man in the story a recruit? The new cemetery at Kahaba is known as the most haunted location within the park. Daytime visitors occasionally come to the visitor center to warn the staff they hear young voices laughing and playing in the woods surrounding the cemetery. Knowing that the staff locks the gates to the park at 5, they're afraid that the playing humans are going to be locked in overnight. The park staff, including the night security guard, used to hunt for the folks who belonged to the mysterious voices, but they never found any living humans in the woods near the cemetery. Spooky. Today, the abandoned city functions as a historical and archaeological site, and it's one of the oldest historic towns that's still kind of standing. Hidden deep within the woods in Flagler County sits the crumbling ruins of a once thriving sugar mill and plantation. Named one of the spookiest ghost towns in America by Country Living magazine, Bouleville is an eerie reminder of the area's unpleasant past, one marred by forced labor and the removal of locals against their will. Today, the site of the former plantation is dead silent, minus the occasional bird warbling and the rustling of leaves in the wind, and ghosty. But back in the early 1800s, it hummed with life. Folks toiled in the Florida heat, performing the grueling work of cutting and boiling sugarcane and tending to fields of cotton, rice, and indigo. Others worked inside, cooking and cleaning. An 1830 census notes that 193 staff were present on the plantation. Today, though, ruins and rumors surround this entire place, which is now a historic state park, along with being a ghost town. Fragments of the sugar mill still stand, allowing visitors a peek at the past, but it's the unseen that has earned the area its spooky title. Some claim the Seminoles cursed this plantation and their spirits lurk around the park. Many claim to have seen orbs of light and shadowy figures in the trees. Others speak of unnaturally cold spots during the scorching summer heat. For more than 400 years, the Fairchild Oak has silently observed the events in the area, serving as a noble guard of the area's magnificent environment. Nearly 2 centuries ago, in 1836, the plantation was actually destroyed, but still, the oak stands strong. Local legend has it that this majestic oak tree was the site of 2 deaths. The first was that of James Ormond II, who lived in a house a stone's throw from the tree and whose body was found underneath it. Cause of death unknown. The second death, shrouded in even more mystery. Norman Harwood, who purchased the property around 1880, is remembered as a hulking man. Some stories portray him as a cattle farmer, while others cite him as a dry goods businessman. Most accounts say Harwood was deep over his head in debt. It's unclear what happened, but legend suggests that Harwood, buried in economic turmoil, took his own life under the tree, and his spirit is still there to this day. A boomtown founded on the back of a gold mine, a center of gambling and other vices before the big bust and subsequent ghost town status. We've heard this story before, and now it's a full-on ghost town. A town like this is bound to attract its fair share of ghosts, if for no other reason than it was built up and abandoned in the gold chaos that swept the country back in the early 1900s. The legend of Mona Bell is one of the saddest and most prevailing stories in the entire area. The tragic Miss Bell was killed in 1908, allegedly killed by Fred Skinner, with whom she had a torrid love affair and fled to Rhyolite with. As the story goes, Miss Bell was already married when she met the charming Fred and went with him, perhaps in search of riches. Bell and Fred walked on the wild side, with Fred earning his money gambling and Bell engaging in the world's oldest profession to make her monies. Allegedly, the problem was that she got too much attention from the local men. Gossip and jealousy ran rampant, but that was just the beginning of this duo's problems. The gold was running out, People began to flee. These two held on until the end, and then things totally soured between them. As the story goes, they clashed over money, and Fred pulled a firearm on his partner in crime. Belle's choice in work caused problems when it came to where she should be buried. Allegedly, she's buried outside the town, but other stories say that her body went back to her hometown in Nebraska. What we do know is that the cursed gravesite, where Mona Bell may or may not lie, is a hotbed of hauntings. Various recordings have been picked up there, including EVPs that say, "This is the end of us, and come lie with us." Is it a spine-tingling siren song from beyond the grave? We might never know. The historic town of Thurmont, located in the heart of the New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurmont in the 1880s. Almost 3 decades later, the town was incorporated. The captain's vision for the 73 acres of land bordering the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad line was to serve the miners working in the area, and the coal mine, and to become a prosperous community for the workers and their families. During its heyday in the 1920s, Thurmont had more coal running through it than Cincinnati, Ohio, and was a flourishing town with a number of businesses and facilities for the railway. Sadly, after a series of setbacks, Thurmont soon went from boom to bust. The train depot has been restored to its former glory and now houses the National Park Service Visitors Center. Stories of many travelers meeting an unsightly end in front of the train depot are pretty numerous. One psychic medium told a story about a person who was thrown from the second-story balcony, leading into investigations. Multiple groups had flashlight communication in the exact location that the medium had pointed to. Also, on more than one occasion, items have been pushed off of the second-story balcony. Park rangers have told stories of locking the building up tight, only to come back and find all doors open, along with every water faucet in the building turned on. The Erskine Pugh House sits on the hill behind Commercial Row and was most recently the home of Erskine and Jackie Pugh, who ran the Baker's Club restaurant in the 1980s. Experts have had some interesting spirit box communication on the porch and have even heard something banging inside the building. One afternoon, they were doing a tour with a psychic medium that told them there was a lady wearing a red dress in the window of the house watching the group. Upon returning home, the medium had felt an immense pull of spiritual energy and has claimed that she has never experienced spiritual energy like she had there. She noted that the lady in the red dress spoke to her later that night, expressing a lot of displeasure for the visit. The medium warned visitors about the lady in the red dress and refused to ever return to Thurmont ever again. And finally for today, Calico is an Old West mining town that's been around since 1881. Nestled in the Mojave Desert, with around 500 silver mines in the area, it took just 2 years for the town's population to reach 1,200 back in the 1880s. By 1890, it was home to about 3,500 people. However, the dream ended almost as quickly as it began, when the Silver Purchase Act of 1890 pushed down silver prices, and by 1900, Calico was abandoned entirely. It has remained so ever since, despite several attempts to rejuvenate the place. However, just because the living have abandoned Calico doesn't mean that it is uninhabited. Over the years, it has built up a reputation as one of the most haunted places in California, if not the entire United States. One of the most commonly spotted entities haunting Calico Ghost Town is said to be a woman by the name of Lucy Lane. History suggests that she ran Calico's general store alongside her husband, John Robert Lane, and she was well into her 90s when she finally passed. And it seems only natural that she would want to stick around the town where she lived and died. Visitors to Calico have frequently reported seeing Lucy walking between what was once her home and the general store. She is easily recognizable by her attire, the beautiful black lace dress in which she was buried.
Coming in at number 5, we have Bodie, California. Located up in the Bodie Hills in Mono County, California near Yosemite, in 1859, 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodie died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodie was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned to a well-populated town. Though, like most mining towns, it saw its peak, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century. A series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. Dinner tables are still set up, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel is held up by a beam have been left untouched for 100 years. Though since it has been left and abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in crumbling state of decay. while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 16 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodie has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from the abandoned buildings. They take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodie. Thus, the curse of Bodie emerged, where if you take something from Bodie, bad luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass, or their romantic life to tank from stealing from Bodie. Coming in at number 4, we have Banick, Montana. The once bright star of Montana is now a ruin, a town in arrested decay, with few remaining storefronts, saloons, and hotels. The town was founded in 1862 when a group of Pikes Peakers from the goldfields of Colorado set up camp on the banks of the creek. Finding gold, the miners staked claims and promptly failed to keep the find a secret. By the spring of 1863, the area boasted a population of 5,000. By 1864, Banick had started to fade, losing importance. The remnants of the past still exist with empty buildings and weathered wood. Today, over 60 structures remain standing, most of which can be explored. The town is known as a site for paranormal activity. It is known that ghosts of the abandoned town walk the streets of Banick. The most common ghost story, though, is the story of Dorothy Dunn. In August 1916, Dorothy Dunn, her cousin Fern, and a friend waded into a dredge pond and stepped into deep water, but none of the three knew how to swim. Luckily, a passerby was able to save both Fern and the friend, but Dorothy was not as lucky. Today, the site of the tragic drowning is referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometime after the accident, Bertie saw a ghost of her friend upstairs in the hotel of the town. She recognized Dorothy by her long blue dress. Although Bertie rarely discussed the sightings, other visitors began to report seeing the spirit of a young girl in a long blue dress in the window of the hotel. Others have reported cold spots, and some have reported trying to speak to the girl in a long blue dress. Banick was filled with adult workers, crimies, murders, and of course the notorious sheriff and outlaw Henry Plummer, whose vast gang terrorized and robbed southwest Montana for years. Henry Plummer was handsome, well-dressed, and charismatic. He was also able to gain the trust of the area miners and was soon elected sheriff of the community. However, little did the citizens of Banick know, but their new sheriff led a secret band of road agents called the Innocents, who began to terrorize the travelers between Banick and Virginia City, robbing and ending more than 100 men over the next several months. Once caught for his terrible actions, Henry Plummer met his fatal end at the hands of the town's citizens. Today, many say that the ghost of Henry Plummer haunts this old settlement. Perhaps he wants to avenge his name. In at number 3, we have Thurmont, West Virginia. The historic town of Thurmont, located in the heart of New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurmont in the 1880s. Captain Thurmont passed in 1910, but the town continued its growth. During its height in the 1920s, the town was flourishing with a number of businesses and facilities in the railway industry. Thurmont had 2 banks, 2 hotels, stores, a cinema, and offices. Yet after a series of setbacks, Thurmont soon went from boom to bust. A number of factors played a role in the town's slow decline. The first problem was the increased rail competition and the emergence of cars. Then in 1930, a fire that led to the closure of the biggest hotel in the town, the Dunglen Hotel, only furthered the decline. The final fate of the town was the Great Depression, and by 1950 Thurmont was a ghost town. Thurmont saw a small revival during World War II when coal was in high demand, but it was not enough. Afterward, the coal fields began to play out. Today, Thurmont stands at just 5-person population, which is why it is nearly vacant ghost town, as the remaining residents either move on or pass away. The house and the land it sits on became the property of the National Park Service. Walking around Thurmont today is a sad reminder of the countless other boom towns which once thrived with human activity, but today are silent and forgotten. Many buildings have long since disappeared, either torn down or, as in the case of the well-loved hotel, burnt to the ground in suspicious circumstances. Many of the family homes lie in increasingly decaying condition, while some have disappeared altogether, leaving only behind a white picket fence and wildflowers which still blossom untended each year. The eerie atmosphere of Thurmont led many visitors to believe that this almost abandoned town is haunted. In at number 2, we have Kahaba Ghost Town. Alabama is home to many small towns. While some of these towns have very few residents, others are true ghost town because they've been completely abandoned. It's no secret that small abandoned towns give off an eerie vibe. As a matter of fact, one Alabama ghost town in particular that fits the bill is Old Kahaba. The small town of Old Kahaba is located in Dallas County. From 1820 to 1826, this small town served as Alabama's first state capital. Before the Civil War, Kahaba was a busy trade city located at the junction of the Alabama and Kahaba rivers. Over the years, floods and decay have affected this historical town. Thus, by 1900, the town was completely abandoned. Today, Old Kahaba is Alabama's most famous ghost town. Many buildings still stand, like the church, schoolhouse, and some houses. However, they have been left untouched for decades. You can still walk the streets of Kahaba and see the ruins and abandoned buildings, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for the ghostly orbs that have been reported to appear in the garden maze at the home of C.C. Peggs. Additionally, many locals share similar ghost stories from the ghost town. While it's known that Kahaba is filled with paranormal activity, one groundskeeper that works at the new Kahaba cemetery has reported hearing voices as they worked. While tourist groups claim to have recordings of unusual sounds, and others say they've captured unexplained lights or shadows in photographs. Another site that's reportedly haunted is the Barker House. This mansion was built in 1860 by Stephen Barker and contained slave quarters behind the house. After people started leaving the town in 1870s, the house was bought by Samuel McGurdy Kirkpatrick. It burned in 1935 and was rebuilt, but today it's in pretty bad condition. The only people usually left inside are paranormal investigators. Reports from said investigators include seeing a ball rolling across the floor on its own, and a stuffed animal appearing to communicate with something else in the room. But the most well-known haunting in Kahaba is Peggs' ghost. Colonel Christopher Claudius Peggs was the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment and was wounded leading a charge at the Battle of Seven Pines in Virginia in May 1862. He died from his wounds 2 months later, on July 15th. As the story goes, a couple were walking behind Peggs' home in the spring of 1862. As they walked, they spotted a ball of light. They tried to touch it, but their hands went right through it. It disappeared, but later came back and followed the couple. Due to all the mysterious crimes that happened in association to Peggs, seeing an orb around his former house is considered a bad omen and possibly even a supernatural warning. And finally, in at number 1, we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. Located in a quiet valley of Columbia County, Pennsylvania, is one of the state's least likely and least publicized tourist attractions. Centralia, Pennsylvania, once thriving with 14 active coal mines and 2,500 residents in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s, its thriving business and population hit a decline, and most of its mines were abandoned. Still at that point, over 1,000 people still resided in the town, and Centralia was far from dying until a coal mine fire began below. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the never-ending coal tunnels that miners dug thousands of feet below the surface. And despite repeated attempts to extinguish the flames, the fire still burns to this day. 20 years after the fire started, however, Centralia, Pennsylvania began to feel the effects of its underground fire, as residents started passing out in their homes from carbon monoxide poisoning. The trees began to die and the ground turned to ash. Roads and sidewalks began to buckle. But some residents didn't want to leave despite the health risks. And for the next 10 years, legal battles and personal arguments between neighbors became the norm. The local newspaper even published a weekly list of who was leaving. Finally, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain in 1993, by which point only 63 residents remained. Officially, they became squatters in houses they had owned for decades. In 2013, the remaining residents, which were fewer than 10, won a settlement against the state. Each was awarded $349,500 and ownership of their properties until they die, at which point Pennsylvania will seize the land and finally demolish what structures remain.
Number 5. Round Valley, New Jersey. Small town life has its charms. A sense of community and familiarity. Oftentimes, families will stay in an area for generations, never desiring to leave for another town or a large city. But sometimes, these moves are forced upon communities by the power structures that are supposed to support them. Round Valley was a small, idyllic town filled with farmers who lived for the simple life. The land was fertile and hardy, and according to residents, capable of growing anything they needed in order to sustain themselves. Unfortunately for the residents of this small town, the state of New Jersey was searching for an area to use in the creation of a massive water reservoir in order to meet the state's growing need for clean water. Due to the town's large size and small population, Round Valley was chosen for the task. Residents were each given a small sum of money and had the opportunity to have their houses moved to a nearby area, but many residents had lived there their entire lives and had no intention of leaving. However, the government made it clear that they had no choice, and though many residents tried to fight the forced move through the legal system, they were not successful, and as a result, were forced to sell their homes, farms, and livestock to the state. Anyone who did not cooperate had their lands seized by eminent domain. The bulldozers came in, and overnight, the small town had been razed to the ground, with all traces of it flooded under the massive reservoir soon after. Number 4. Pompeii. Next we have our oldest and most famous entry, the ancient city of Pompeii. The city of Pompeii was founded around the year 450 BC in Italy on the coast of the Gulf of Naples. It survived for hundreds of years, with control being passed from the Greeks to the Samnites and falling under Roman control. Its location near the water meant that their economy was heavily reliant on trade with Provence and Spain. The town flourished during its life, having grown to a population of 20,000 people by the year 79 AD. Unfortunately, the city of Pompeii fell under the shadow of a volcano called Mount Vesuvius. Pompeii had suffered 2 earthquakes in the years leading up to the disaster, but little did the city folk know that these were just the precursor to Mount Vesuvius erupting in autumn of 79 AD. When the volcano went off, it spewed out a cloud of ash and pumice 30 kilometers into the air. The people of the city began evacuating, with the majority of the town being able to escape within the first day. The people who stayed behind were not so lucky, as the eruption entered its second phase, and the volcano began releasing hot molten rock, which engulfed the city under 6 feet of lava. The heat of the city reached a staggering level, causing even those who managed to get to shelter to die of heat exposure, being cooked alive in their homes. The eruption continued for the entire day, and when it was over, the survivors who had evacuated just one day before discovered that their town and the remaining people living there had disappeared, being completely buried under 20 feet of tephra. The site was slowly uncovered by both thieves and archaeologists over the next few centuries, with tales of the city that disappeared capturing the public interest ever since. Number 3. Frank, Alberta. In the Canadian province of Alberta, there is a mountain that the indigenous Blackfoot people call the Mountain That Moves. They refused to ever camp under its shadow, but that didn't stop the American entrepreneur Henry Frank from setting up a mining town there in 1901. The village of Frank boomed for the next few years that followed, as its miners took huge amounts of coal from Turtle Mountain. Little did they know that the mining efforts on the mountain, combined with the natural erosion that had been occurring on its peak, would soon cause disaster. On April 23, 1903, in the early morning hours, a section of limestone broke off the top of the mountain, causing a landslide. The 121 million tons of rock fell at a rate of 70 miles per hour, meaning that it only took about a minute and a half to bury the nearby town. Almost 100 of the townspeople were killed in the rock slide, many not even having had time to wake up from the massive rumbling that preceded the arrival of their limestone tomb. The men working the night shift in the mine were trapped inside by the landslide, with the air becoming more toxic by the second. After hours of struggling to dig their way out of the mine's sealed entrance, they discovered that the mine was also filling with water from the nearby river. They eventually escaped after digging for 17 hours straight by digging their way up and out through a seam of coal that one of the miners remembered went all the way to the surface of the mountain. The miners made their way back to town, but any relief that they may have felt was cut short when they discovered that what had trapped them had not been a cave-in, but the deadliest landslide in Canadian history. They found that the cottages that had served as their homes had been destroyed, and that some of their families had been killed, buried under the very mountain that had provided them with a living not long before, and the whole thing had taken just over 3 minutes. Number 2. Herkimer, Iowa. Having talked about the towns that disappeared as a result of government interference and natural disasters, let's take the rest of the list to talk about the communities that disappeared with no explanation at all. The town of Herkimer in the American state of Iowa was reportedly a bustling community, much like many others in the late 1920s, with a church, a diner, and a gas station. Everything about the town seemed normal until tales of the bizarre began to emerge about the small town. It all started when a photographer taking aerial photos from a plane noticed something strange in the photos, or rather, something not there in them. The The photos seem to show that there was no one living in Urkhammer, with the fields around the town being overgrown and seemingly untended. Things got even stranger when a tourist passed through the town to get gas while on his way to his final destination. He talked to the gas station attendant and paid him to fill up his tank. He continued on his way, but when he checked his gas gauge, he realized that the attendant had ripped him off and there was no additional fuel in his tank. He angrily turned his car around, intending to go back to the town and get his money back. However, although he could see the town in the distance, no matter how long or how fast he drove, the town remained in the distance, never getting closer. He eventually ran out of gas and he continued on foot, but was unable to reach the town. Later reports from people driving past the town claimed that the once bustling community seemed completely abandoned, with rows and rows of houses sitting seemingly unoccupied. Others even reported that they visited the town to try and get supplies during the Dust Bowl of 1932, and found themselves unable to enter the buildings as they had become intangible and they simply passed through them. They went to nearby law enforcement who went to check out the strange town, but the entire town had disappeared by the time they got there, leaving only an empty and overgrown field in its place. Number 1. The New City Complex in New Jersey, USA. Proving the age-old adage that nothing good ever happens in Jersey is our next entry. When the city of Newark water and reservoir plant opened, this small town was built in order to house the workers who ran the plant. Things seemed to be going off without a hitch until 1992, when it was discovered that the town had very suddenly been abandoned. There was no trace of any break-ins, and all the house's possessions had remained undisturbed. No luggage or clothes seemed to be missing from the citizens' closets, so it seemed as if everyone had simply vanished. This was further driven home by the empty homes with half-eaten plates of dinner left out on the tables. Where did these people go? Did they leave of their own volition, or were they forced to? If they left of their own free will, why didn't they leave any word of where they had gone? Why did they leave all their worldly belongings behind? We may never know the answer. There are many theories about the fate of the townsfolk. One of the more interesting of them is that a stranger moved to town, and though he seemed normal at first, he was anything but. The story goes that over the next few months, strange and unexplained phenomena took place, with the townsfolk seeing mysterious figures standing on the streets, watching their houses during the night, and pets starting to disappear without a trace. According to this theory, the stranger was a leader of a cult, and using his influence over the cult members, he had all the inhabitants of the small town brought into his basement to be sacrificed. Whatever the actual reason is, the various houses and buildings of the New City Complex remain empty and rotting to this day.